I came across two gentlemen, and I stole this from him, and I really agree with this, and that is if two people agree on something, one isn't needed. So we're going to talk about some maybe controversial type issues. We're going to hopefully make the individuals think as far as in their planning, what they should be doing, et cetera, et cetera. But if I could, Andy, if you would maybe throw up the tax brain teaser. That is I'll just kind of read through it quickly. I'm not going to read through all the slides with you folks. I'll just kind of summarize each one. But this is looking at an individual. Bill, he's retired, has taxable income of $42,000, so he's in the 22% tax bracket. That includes $38,000 from an IRA, $25,000 in Social Security benefits. He taps his IRA for an extra $1,000 for a concert road trip. What's his tax liability on that $1,000? Well, your logical brain would say that it's going to be a 22, and that's the next slide that we have here, 22%, so it's going to be $220, but that's the wrong answer. The actual tax exposure on that additional $1,000, which is slide 4, is $407. And I'll go through that in more detail here after a little bit. I'm going to have Nate take it here shortly, and I'll walk through as far as how it actually breaks down. So slide 5 is going to be just kind of what we're going to be discussing here, and it's going to be, we're going to try to get people to understand how to get from forever taxed to never taxed. This has to do with retirement plans. Pay taxes on the seeds, not the harvest. Create more tax-free income. Avoid costly and sneaky self-taxes. Lower the amount of your Social Security income subject to tax. Lower your Medicare premium. Redirect tax dollars, which is one of my favorites, from the IRS to charities that you care about. And finally, smile more. So hopefully everybody, 1, 2, 3, maybe the whole list you're interested in. That's what we're going to be talking about here momentarily. Nate's going to start off. He's going to talk about Social Security and Medicare.
Perfect. And I think, as David mentioned, we're going to go over a lot of topics today that are pretty encompassing. And Social Security and Medicare are no different. We could have a whole program in and of itself of just those ones. So when we go through the next two topics, just understand that we're going to be pretty broad when we go over some of these. Obviously, everyone's situation is different. The assets that they have, married, not married, single, need of income, things along those lines. We need to make these individual decisions. But a lot of the topics that we talk about today are going to be pretty broad and will need to be narrowed down a little bit more specific on an individual basis. Before we kind of get into Social Security, I always like to kind of bring it back and look at the big picture to see where Social Security actually fits into the overall picture. So if we look at the slide that basically looks at the assets and the goals, when it comes down to transitioning an individual or a couple from their working career into the next stage of their lives, it really is looking at, okay, what they have versus what they need. So the assets that we're looking at are any savings that they may have. So IRA accounts, Roth accounts, 401k, savings, checkings accounts, those type of things. We're also then looking at any monthly income amounts. So Social Security falls into that amount. Any pensions that the individuals may have that we can look at maximizing. And then lastly, as far as part-time work, I think a lot of people oftentimes overlook the ability that human capital is actually an asset that you have. And obviously there's some sways in the ability to do that throughout an individual's lifetime, but it is technically an asset that, again, needs to be considered in the big picture. And then so now we look at our goals, and we like to look at these as the 4 L's. So lifestyle, what is it that you will actually need to live comfortably? What type of retirement do you want that you've worked so hard to get to? How much will you need to fund that? Longevity, how long will our assets need to last to fund our retirement throughout our lifetime, and then if you're married, a spouse's lifetime. Liquidity, how easily can you convert these assets into being able to fund your retirement? Obviously, if you own a house, you have equity in your home, but that equity is not necessarily going to pay for a broken down dishwasher or washer and dryer machine or something like that, as opposed to a checking account, an IRA account where you can access that cash pretty easily. And then lastly is legacy. What are your plans for your assets after you pass away? Is there a favorite charity that you like, that you really want to leave a donation to or whatever? Kids, grandchildren, whatever the case it may be, what are those goals that you're going to have? And then I think the elephant in the room that everyone continues to talk about is healthcare costs. And I think you can lump in taxes, and I think you can lump in long-term care along with that, because, again, you look at the trajectory that each of those three are continuing on. I don't think many people are going to say that taxes, long-term care insurance, healthcare costs are going to go down in the future. They're likely probably going to continue to rise like they have been. I think best case scenario is they stay the same. So if those three items, and are oftentimes the bigger ticket items throughout our retirement, are going to continue to rise, how are you going to offset that with the assets that you have? Social Security is one of them. And again, we look at those four goals. So lifestyle, longevity, liquidity, legacy. Three of them have something in common, and that's lifestyle, liquidity, and legacy. Those three items we can technically change. We can adjust. We can be fluid with them as far as through our lifetime. We may want to have an X amount of dollars in retirement, but if we're going to plan on leaving a big chunk to a charity that we dearly desire, we may have to back off our lifestyle a little bit to be able to have that money to be able to fund that. Vice versa, if we're planning on leaving a big legacy to somebody, we may have to back off how we live. So again, being fluid with that. The one thing that we don't necessarily change, and is the unknown, is longevity. We don't know necessarily how long we're going to last. We need to have something that's there that's going to outlive us. Social Security benefit is one of those avenues that can do that. So if we move on to the next slide there,
Nate, I have a
when we look
question.
at Social Security benefits, 96% of the U.S. workers are covered by Social Security benefits. And of those 73%, of those 96%, 73% of those are receiving benefits early. So they're taking them before their full retirement age. They're negating that 8% increase that you get on your benefit every year that you delay that past your full retirement age up until age 70. Now, obviously, with the market volatility that we just went through, if you can guarantee me an 8% rate of return on an investment, and it's going to be locked in for those couple years, sign me up for that right away. But again, people are claiming these benefits early, and they're negating that. So if we look at the next slide with the guy scratching his head, obviously, why do people do that? It's because of the confusion around it. They don't necessarily understand it. Their coworker took it at 62. Their friend took it at this point in time. They don't know all the options, so you know what? I'm just going to take it now. They don't have a plan when it comes into it, and they don't understand the impact that that's not only going to have for them in the near term, but what that can do for them and then possibly a surviving spouse down the road. So if we go to the next slide there, in the overview of Social Security, how is Social Security calculated? Well, to become eligible for Social Security, you need 40 quarters of wages. You can get 4 quarters a year. So basically, if you pay into the Social Security system for all 4 quarters for 10 years, you're eligible to be receiving benefits. Your benefit is then calculated by your 35 highest years of earnings. So if you have 32 years, they're going to factor into 0 for those 3 years. If you have 37 years of earnings reported, they're going to kick out your 2 lowest years and use the highest 35 years to factor that. When they take those 35 years of earnings, you're going to come up with your primary insurance amount. This is the benefit that you will get at your full retirement age. So if you take it early, any reduction in benefits is going to come off of that PIA amount. Any increase in benefits of delaying it past your full retirement age is going to be included on top of your full retirement age amount. So your full retirement age then is based off of the year you were born. So those born before 1954 generally have a full retirement age of 66. Those born 1960 or later have a full retirement age of 67. And if you fall in between, you can see where you'd fall into that point in time. So first off, understand when your full retirement age. That's the starting point for any reduction or increase in benefits. So we go on to the next one. Everyone always asks, how much will my benefit be? Well, it depends. So if we look at the next page where it has the Social Security statement on it, this is the paper statement that's mailed out to people that gives them an overview of what their benefit is going to be. On the top left corner of that picture there, the picture has it where your full retirement age benefit is in the upper right-hand corner. In this individual's circumstance, their full retirement age benefit is $2,690. So at their full retirement age of 67, That's what they would get at that point in time per month. If we look at the one on to the right of that side, your earnings record, this is page 3 of that statement. This is the listing of all of your earnings over your working career. And it's important that you check this frequently to make sure that your earnings are reported correctly, because if they're not reported correctly, this is what the Social Security system is going to use to calculate your benefit. So again, we want to make sure that what is being reported is actually accurate. What I like to tell people to look at when they get to this statement is that highlighted part there on that photo. So this would be page 3 of your Social Security statement, right about in the middle of the page. This is going to list the amount that you as an individual and then what your employer paid into Social Security on your behalf. So for this individual's circumstance, there was about $253,000 paid into Social Security on that person's behalf. Half of it roughly was paid in by them as the employee. The other half was paid in as the employer on their benefit. So if we look at that chart in the bottom left-hand corner, this is the amount that those individuals will be getting at some different time frames throughout their life. So at 62, which is the earliest that they could take it, 67, and age 70. And if you follow those dots over correspondingly to the chart on the right and cumulatively look at the amount in benefits that those individuals are going to be getting throughout their lifetime, and then understand by that number that we just talked about that $253,000 was paid in on their behalf versus what they're going to be getting back, I think it's important to know that that old adage of I need to take it as early as possible to get my money back just isn't quite as true as what it used to be. Simple fact of people are just living longer, and it's in essence pulling more money out of that system. So we go on to the next slide. So when then should I take it, Nate? Well, you need to have a great claiming strategy, and you need to understand the choices that you make and how they're going to impact you. So when we go to the next slide there, well, how much will my benefit be? This is just a comparison as far as break-even points of an individual whose full retirement age benefit is $2,000 a month. So we look at those $2,000 a month and taking it at age 62, which obviously your benefit would be reduced, the full $2,000 amount at your full retirement age, or we get that 8% a year increase if we wait until age 70. So we look at the break-even points between taking it at 62 and 66. It's roughly about 77 and 9 months, as opposed to if we look at somebody comparing taking it at 62 versus age 70, it's roughly age 80. So the longer you live past that mark, the better off it is for you to delay taking those benefits. So again, that's just for an individual. If we flip over to the next side, we need to make sure that if you are married, that we are coordinating the benefits between spouses. So what this is saying is that if you are married, your spouse or you may be able to take it off of your spouse's record, may be able to take a benefit off of their working record. So this is called the spousal benefit, where you at your full retirement age would be eligible to take 50% of your spouse's benefit and basically take that as a benefit being paid to you. Where this comes into play is, let's say one of the spouses was working throughout their career, the other spouse was working at home, raising the family, whatever the case may be, just didn't have enough years to pay into it, they would be eligible to take a benefit, half of it, off of their working spouse's record. Now, there are certain things that have to happen for this to come to fruition, but again, you can read through those. Mostly, you have to be married for at least 10 years, and so on and so on. Now, there is one point that I want to point out to you, that if you were born before January 1st of 1954 and you have not started taking your Social Security benefits, you need to see somebody probably soon, because you are still eligible to be taking advantage of the restricted application for spousal benefits. In essence, you would be able to take half of your spouse's benefit at your full retirement age and still allow your own personal benefit to get that 8% increase a year up until age 70. If you're born before January 1st of 1954, your spouse was born before that date, and you have not started taking benefits, you probably need to see somebody to make sure that we are maximizing the benefit that we can take. So if we fast forward to the next slide there, this also applies to ex-spouses. A lot of times people think if they get a divorce, they're not able to file off of that ex-spouse's record, and this is not true. Again, you need to have been married for 10 years. that ex-spouse doesn't need to know that you are filing off of their record. You do not have to call them and ask for approval. You just have to be of age to be able to take them. Your ex-spouse has to be of age to be able to file for benefits. They do not have to have taken them. They just have to be of age, which is age 62. And then as far as being able to take that. Now again, if you're going to file off of an ex-spouse's record, you yourself cannot be remarried. So again, if that falls in the case, if you know anybody that would fall into, give us a call and we can definitely help them come out too. So we look at it going forward to the next slide there, when and how I should claim my benefits with spousal planning. I said if you're married, you need to coordinate when you take your benefits, not only for you personally, but under the unfortunate circumstances of a spouse passing away. So if we look at a spousal planning, so husband and wife, whatever the case may be, if both of them take it at 62, both 70, likelihood of both of those probably happening, not necessarily as high as what we'd think it would be. We like to look at it as a hybrid approach, where we take the lower earning spouse, have them file for their benefit as soon as they become able, 62 or later, and then the higher earning spouse who has the higher benefit, let them wait as long as possible to age 70. What we are doing is we are creating an income stream from Social Security early while we are maximizing that higher benefit. So again, the unfortunate circumstances that one of the spouses passes away, one of those Social Security benefits is going. The lower benefit is going to be stopped. The higher benefit is the benefit that's going to be continued on through the lifetime of that surviving spouse. So again, we want to make sure that we're looking at this from not just an individual, but a spousal planning standpoint. We go on to the next one as far as survivor benefits as well. This has a little bit different rules than what a spousal benefit does. So if you, again, are on the unfortunate circumstance of a spouse passing away, you have some options that you need to be aware of to make sure you are maximizing this. Basically, you are able to decide between your spouse's benefit or your deceased spouse's benefit or your own benefit. Taking one of those does not negate you taking the other one at a later time. So again, we want to look at those options and decide, okay, which one is going to be bigger at my full retirement age versus is my benefit going to be bigger at age 70. You have some options there. You need to make sure that you get that right to be able to maximize those. The next slide we have on there as far as strategies and widowers kind of takes you through that same strategy again. I kind of covered most of that. We go on to the next page, and that's the earnings test. This is a key point that a lot of times people overlook. So the earnings test basically comes into factor when you file for your benefits prior to your full retirement age and you are still working. So there's an earnings limit, and for 2020, that earnings limit was $18,240. So for every $2 that you make above that limit, they are going to withhold $1 in benefits from your benefit if you claim that. So as a general rule of thumb, if you are before your full retirement age and still working with an income above that yearly limit, it is usually not a good idea for you to file for your benefit. One, you're locking in your benefit at a lower amount. Two, you're not even going to get your benefit because they're going to withhold those benefits from you. So again, understanding your decisions that you make, because a lot of times with Social Security especially, it's irreversible. You're going to pay those consequences for the rest of your life. And if we go to that next slide there, if you can take anything away from this from the Social Security standpoint, is that when you retire and when you start your benefits need to be two separate decisions. Now, am I saying that once you retire, you can't take your Social Security benefits? No, you just need to understand why it is you are taking them and looking at the big picture. Just because you retire is not a good reason to start your Social Security benefits. You need to look at the big picture to maximize those. So we keep moving right along to the next slide there with Medicare. We go to the next one after that, the overview of Medicare. So Medicare is your health insurance that most of you know that comes into effect when you turn 65 or you become disabled. It is run through the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services, and you enroll through that through the Social Security Administration. So SSA.gov, you can file for your Social Security benefits through that website. You also file for your Medicare through that website. We go on to the next part, and it looks at the 4 different parts of Medicare. So your Part A is your hospital insurance. This is what you've been paying into for your working career. You look at your Part B. This is the yearly amount that you go. I think for 2020, the lowest premium for Part B is roughly $144. There's 5 tiers to the Part B premium. The more you make, the more you are going to pay for Medicare. You're not going to get any more coverage. You're just going to pay more because of your income. So I think David's going to go through here coming up through some of his slides, ways that we can keep that income down to not run into some negative consequences as far as from a Medicare from an income planning standpoint. You have Part D, which is your Medicare prescription drug coverage, and then you have your Part C, which is your Medicare Advantage. When you look at those two things, your Part A and B is provided by Medicare. Your Part C, which is your Medicare Advantage plans, or your Part D, any drug plans, Medigap policy, supplements, are outside of some private insurance companies that are running those type of things. So we go on to the next one is your enrollment in Medicare. There's a couple different dates that you need to make sure that you make sure that you fall within. Otherwise, you will be subject to a penalty, and that penalty for Medicare does not go away. It stays with you for the rest of your life. So obviously, the first one is your initial enrollment period. This is you first filing for Medicare turning 65. So you have a 7-month window. You have 3 months prior, the month of you turning 65, and then 3 months after as far as to initially file for Medicare. You need to make sure that you plan. You need to make sure that you file for your coverage to make sure you have coverage during those 7 months to make sure that, again, there's no lapses for one in your coverage, and then 2, that there's no penalties that are going to do that. Special enrollment period would be as if you retire past age 65, you were covered under a company plan, you have some time after that separation to be able to file for it. The general enrollment period is every year when you can kind of change your plans, and obviously that coincides with the annual election period, which runs every year from October 5th through December 7th. This is if you are currently on Medicare and you want to change your plan for the upcoming year. That is your window of opportunity to look at the new plans that are out there, seeing if what you have is the best one for you going forward. Maybe your health history, maybe your health condition changed, and you need to go to a different plan. That annual election period is something you need to look at every single year. So we keep moving right along. Why should you choose a plan? How should you choose a plan? Obviously, costs are a big one that most people focus on, but don't let that be the sole driver of how you do that. You need to look at your premiums, your co-payments, your co-insurance, any deductibles that are going to be paid for each one, availability, geographic location. Depending on which plan you go to, there may be a network, and if you go out of network to get health care costs, it may not be covered. So again, all questions you need to look at. We continue on to the next one, 2 ways to have Medicare. Basically, when you go through Medicare, you're either going to go through the original Medicare route, where you get Part A, Part B, any drug coverage with the Part D drug plan, and then fill in any gaps with any medical supplement plan. So basically, it's an a la carte thing. You pick kind of what you need based off of what it is that you're going to need coverage on. Or you go with a Medicare Advantage plan, where most of that is all encompassing with one plan that you have to go that route. Most people look at that, and depending on which route they go, do they go that route or not? Again, it's all an individual decision we need to look at. Now we go last one here as far as Medicare, advantages, disadvantages of possibly a Medicare Advantage plan. There may be some additional services available. You may pay a lower premium every month. But the disadvantage that goes into that, if you go to the hospital and you need health care, you are going to pay more out of pocket every time that you go. So again, it's kind of, you need to decide and then sit down with an individual to say, do I want to pay a flat rate? I know what I'm going to be paid. Even if I go every single day, I know I'm going to pay a flat premium. Or do I want to kind of go as a pay-as-I-go type of thing, and knowing that I'm fairly healthy, I don't need much care, why would I pay a big premium? So again, 2 different separate routes, but again, understanding it to make sure you're paying for something you don't necessarily need. A lot of information, ran through it very quickly, but questions, give us a call. David will kind of continue on here to see how this fits into the big picture.
Well, David, I'm going to ask you to pause real quick here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen to see if anybody has any questions. I thought I was a fast talker. Nate, you got me beat, man.
There's a lot of information here, Andy. I'm trying to ramble through this. I think I went over my time limit I was allotted.
No, man, you're good. So do we have any questions from those that are on the call? All right. Hearing none, then I will continue to share my screen, and David will continue.
All right, excellent. Social Security, Medicare, as Nate basically tried to explain to us is a lot more complicated, I think, than what people think. Social Security decisions are crucial. You're talking about an asset for most married couples that would be probably on the low end anymore, a $500,000 decision to upwards of $1 million, depending on your income while you're working. So this thing needs to be done right. It also needs to be done, I guess I would just reinforce what Nate said as far as a family decision. If you're married, this isn't my dad died early, so I'm going to draw it now because he was my age. That we hear a lot from people. The other thing we hear from people is that it won't be around. Social Security isn't going to be around. And again, that's $1 out of every $4 in the system today, in our economy today, comes from Social Security. So it's not going away. It's going to have to be modified. There's no question. When Social Security began, you had 6 people paying in for every 1 person drawing. When Social Security began, you couldn't draw till age 65, and life expectancy was just a tad bit over 60. These are really important facts to remember and understand. It's not going away, and it's a really, really important decision as far as to get it right. So I'll pick it up as far as on the next slide, and that is the big lie: your tax rate will be lower in retirement. And Andy, if you'd go to the very next one that shows the historical tax rates, I'd appreciate it. So again, I've been in this industry right at 40 years. And in my 40 years, it's a rare person that goes into retirement that sees a dramatic decrease as far as in their tax rates. And when I was going through my CFP, Certified Financial Planner, and CLU, ChFC, all of them, it was pretty much the textbook and the higher learning centers, putting it mildly, basically advocated that the typical person is going to work hard, they're going to be in a fairly high bracket, they're going to retire, and they're going to be in a low bracket. But I don't have a lot of those people that I work with. What I have is people that work hard, make a good income, and when they retire, they're also going to have a good income. So they don't see this massive reduction. There aren't a lot of people that are making, say, $100,000 today that plan on retiring making $20,000 a year. So it's just not realistic. So the big lie is that you're probably going to be at a comparable rate. And what this chart is showing is just kind of historical levels as far as top marginal brackets. And I don't know if there's anybody out there that believes that tax rates could be lower in a year or 5 years or 10 years. But I'm not one of them. I don't believe that that's going to happen. I think we're moving the other direction. And I'll back it up with a little data here. This is a little off script, but I want people to understand this as far as and I think everybody is. Again, I said I wasn't going to talk politics, but if we look historically, there's been a party that's been kind of disciplined as far as spending money. There's not a party that's disciplined spending money now. Try this on for size, and I'll just rattle these numbers off. Between the federal government, state, and local governments, if you compared their debt currently to the GDP, it's 217% of GDP. We're at levels we have never, ever, ever seen before. People say, yeah, David, but we're going through a crisis. And I'm not stupid. I understand that. But the reality is these are levels we have never seen. Anything even close to this. And to believe that we can continue down this path is crazy. Let's talk corporate debt for a second. Corporate debt is at 90% of GDP. Again, never anything even close. Well, people argue interest rates are really low as far as today. The corporations are refinancing, and they're putting more debt on the books as far as to hopefully go out. But history says that when you have heavy debt loads, that's a huge drag on the economy. Let's take a look at interest rates. We're interest rates, say, 3-4 years ago. We're interest rates right now. I don't know if any of you have ever thought about this as far as in recent times, but you could go out and get a 10-year government bond, 10 years, lock up your money, safe and secure with the U.S. government, and it's going to pay you a whopping 0.6%, give or take, depending on the minute of the day. 0.6%, not 6, but 0.6. European debt, much of it, is negative rates of return. It's just shocking as far as what's happening out there. And I argue that, why is that? Well, Japan, if you go back and pull out the history books and look at it, 1989, the Nikkei index in 1989 was almost 40,000 for round numbers. That's the equivalent of our Dow. So about 40,000 in 1989. So we're going back, again, rounding things off, 30 years. Anybody know where it is today? If you said roughly half of that, you'd be right. Now, where have interest rates been for most of that period of time in Japan? Well, it's been ballparkish, 1% and below. So low interest rates are really good if you're borrowing money. If you're that retiree that's going into retirement or you're in retirement, this has been really, really rough. I started in 1981, and you can walk in and get a 16% CD in the bank, 30-year bond paying 16%. And if somebody told you back then that there'd be a day that interest rates would be 1% or below, I think you would have thought they're nuts. But that's where we are. And I suspect we're probably going to be there for a while. But what if you're wrong, David? What if interest rates go up? Let's say they go up, give or take, 1%. Just 1%. What does that mean to this debt load that we're carrying as a country? Well, I think what it means is about currently 260 additional billions of dollars additional in interest alone that we have to pay. This is a real problem. But I'm not here to lecture anybody. What I am here to do is to say this needs to be factored into your planning process. Interest rates are not going to probably, with all likelihood, going to go up quickly. The economy is going to struggle with all this debt and the interest that we're paying. It's going to be very difficult. So let's look at a 50-50 portfolio that for years a fairly conservative person would put themselves in as far as in retirement. So you'd have 50% of your money in bonds and cash and 50% in a diversified mix of stocks. So again, early in my career, that would probably yield you, well, the bonds are going to give you double digits returns. The stocks hopefully give you double-digit returns. You're living pretty nicely. What is it today? If you look at that 50% that's in bonds and in cash, that's basically, as I tell every client that I work with, that's pretty much zero. Let's call it zero. It's so close to zero, call it zero. Well, zero's there, and what are stocks going to do? We're at all-time highs. We're at all-time highs. Up until last week or two, we're at all-time highs. We got all these tech stocks that are just blowing things out as far as on the upside. Oops, but the last couple of weeks they haven't. Now, I'm not saying that the party's over by any means. They're going to be okay over a period of time, but are things a little pricey right now? That's the concern that we have, and again, that's why we're doing this presentation, to try to help people as far as think through this. So again, that's looking at basically day-to-day type stuff. Let's look at the 4 stages of retirement, the next slide. And again, I'm not going to go through this, but we've kind of broken this down. We put it in work and save from 50 to 60, and then the go-go years, as we call them, 60 to 70. And then we go into the go-slow years, 70 to 80. As Nate discussed, the importance of the longevity aspect, people are living longer. I'm telling you, when I started in 81, you didn't see people touching 90 as a whole. You rarely saw people touching 80. Today it's routine. Hey, he died early, died at age 81. He died early. So it's a whole different ballgame. We need to be aware of it. The next slide, again, we're trying to understand retirement taxes. Number 33 on mine here, Andy, is if you save $500,000. Okay, so my frustration in this area is this, is I have people wander in the office and they throw their financial statement on the table and they say, I've got $500,000 in my plan here. And then we got to be the bad guy and say, no, you don't. You have basically 350. And they say, no, it says 500. And I said, well, you forgot about the IOU. The IOU is the government wants the taxes. Oh, by the way, if you don't pay them, the kids are going to pay them. I had one client that had over $3 million in it and thought if he died, that the kids would get it and there'd be no taxes. Oh, no. You haven't paid taxes on this 401k plan. You're going to pay them or the kids are going to pay them. So then we get into planning and what makes the most sense. The next chart basically illustrates it's 3 different scenarios, a 0% tax bracket, you know, pie in the sky versus a higher bracket, and the difference that it means as far as on the cash flow that you're going to be able to spend. The next one, what are we looking at here? Medicare and Social Security. What the heck does this have to do with retirement planning? It has a lot to do with it, because if you don't know, the higher your taxable income, the more your Social Security will be affected by that in a negative way, not in a positive way, in a negative way. What about Medicare? Well, Medicare, as Nate said, it's a multi-tier system. And so the higher your taxable income, the more you're going to pay in the form of a Medicare premium. That's not what you want to hear, but that's the reality. So the next slide, we look at the example we started with earlier, that 40% tax bracket effective on that $1,000. And keep in mind, it's only the $1,000. And we hand-selected this, folks, to illustrate a point. And that point is that there's a break point there where, depending on your income, and again, in most situations, we'll call it, for simplicity's sake, taxable income, that if you exceed that, now that's going to negatively impact your Social Security, and that's what we're talking about here. So that extra $1,000 in this example bumped it up to a level that now Social Security kicked in as far as at a higher level, as far as that income being subject to tax, your Social Security income. People say, what are you talking about? When I paid into Social Security, it was a tax. You're telling me when I take it out, I may have to pay some taxes on it? Yep, that's right. That's right. It's going to be included in your income, depending on your taxable income. So what we want to do is we want to try to, as best we can, drive that down. So that example is pretty graphic, and that's on 2 slides there. We're just illustrating it. Your effective rate on that $1,000 is a 40% tax rate, which, again, most people aren't aware of that this can take place, but it can. So key number 3, you must plan on how and when to take the money out of your taxable, tax-deferred, your tax-free. The next slide shows which account are you going to spend first, and it's showing Sam and Mary, and they've got a decent net worth. They got their money scattered in a couple different buckets, different taxable buckets. And then we go to the next slide. It says conventional wisdom. And conventional wisdom, if you don't already know this, is usually wrong. What we were taught in the textbooks years ago relating to taxes and planning and what have you is mostly wrong today. And the reason it's mostly wrong today is because the government has figured out ways to try to backdoor things without raising your tax rates. Reagan had a famous quote talking about we were able to increase people's taxes and yet reduce the tax rate. And what did they do? They took away deductions. So here, these are backdoor ways. So conventional, iffy, probably for most people not right. Go to the alternative approach, which is the next slide. What are we doing here? We're doing these things that don't feel initially comfortable for people, and that is we're converting. We're exposing money today that we don't have to pay taxes on, but we're voluntarily going to pay a little bit of tax today so that tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day, that money can all be tax-free. So it's a really, really sophisticated tool, and we visually are showing you here as far as on the next slide, and I just absolutely love this slide because what it's showing on the top is the typical way of doing things. So the first 10%, then we go to 12%, and then we've got a little bit at 22. And then the bottom, what are we doing? We're doing 10, 12, and 22. Kind of looks the same, but what's taking place is we voluntarily put some extra money in there and voluntarily paid some extra taxes today so that tomorrow we don't have to. And people say, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. It makes a lot of sense because that tax-free income tomorrow is going to help keep your liability as far as the Social Security is concerned lower. It's going to potentially help keep your Medicare premium lower. It makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, most people historically have just done this micro, putting it under a microscope type look. I tell people, they say, well, should I do the raw? Should I do the traditional? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, it's amateur night at the ballpark. When people look at it that way, what they're doing is they've got it under a microscope. This isn't planning that's under a microscope. This is a multi-year type decision, and many times even multi-generational decision, what makes the most sense. And when we're in a low tax rate regime, as I believe we are today, there's a lot of flawed advice being doled out to people saying, here's what I think you ought to do. Yeah, today, yeah, you feel good about it. I call it the sugar high. Yeah, I put an extra $5,000 in my plan. I get the deduction. I save this much in tax. I feel good about that today. Not looking at tomorrow and the negative impact that that's going to have potentially in your situation. So we got to look at this over a multi-year period of time. So next slide, low income years. When should I do this conversion stuff, David? Well, you better discuss it with somebody that's competent in this area as far as whether you should or shouldn't. And, oh, by the way, none of us know for sure because none of us can predict what's going to happen tomorrow. So it's a guess. So when people definitively say you should or you shouldn't and so on, no, they need to qualify. They need to tell you the truth. The truth is we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But I think common sense says that rates aren't going lower. I think common sense says that markets are overextended. I think common sense says that we have a debt load that somehow needs to be serviced. And I think all of this basically translates into higher tax rates at some point. So if that's true, then maybe we voluntarily pay a little bit of extra tax today. And maybe we start planting those seeds as far as to help us make better decisions tomorrow. And tomorrow being somewhere in the retirement arena. So the next slide, Roth conversions. They can help reduce rising tax rates. They can help be that buffer if we're right. Nice little summary as far as on it there. Oh, and then what about this? See, when I started, there was pensions. You all realize as far as today, there's very, very few pensions that exist out there. We call them 401ks now, self-funded. You know, employer will throw in some money, you put in some money, etc. Fine, dandy, no problem there. But I got to make good decisions with that money. Well, with people, how things are different today versus how they were back in 1981, 82, 83 when I started, was back then you had the nice fat pension. So I don't want to sound like a male chauvinist pig right now, but let me just illustrate what I would encounter most of the time. So it's the male working outside the home making the higher income, and maybe mom got a part-time job once the kids were older, what have you. And the end result, we now go into retirement. Dad has a nice pension. When he checks out, what happens to the pension? Well, it didn't disappear, but it did get cut in half. Okay? So mom's income was cut in half, and the theory being what? Is that the expenses are going to go down, and they do to some degree. Today, that's not the case. Today, people have their 401k monies, they have their IRAs, whatever. When one of the spouses checks out, the other spouse still has that same income. Okay? Totally different today than it was back then. Why is that an issue? Now we're talking about the widow's penalty. What's the widow's penalty? Oh, wait a minute. If I'm a joint tax return person yesterday, and now today I have the same income, but one person passed away, what just happened to my tax bracket? My tax bracket just went up, and probably pretty dramatically. So again, we need to be aware of this pertaining to the planning and the decisions that people are making. But again, as Nate said earlier, and he's right on this, is that the decisions you're making, they're over long periods of time. We've got to make good decisions. We got to think this stuff through. We got to put on our common sense cap. And the common sense cap says we need to not only diversify our investments, but we need to diversify the type of tools that we have in our tool bag, that being some pre-tax, some being post-tax, to build flexibility as far as in our planning for tomorrow. Next slide. Okay, here's kind of where the rubber starts hitting the road. Let's talk a little bit about rates of return and what it means. So, and I can get on my high horse on this sucker for a while, folks. So I'll try to give you the abbreviated version. But I understand in looking at numbers, when you have a nice year, a nice 2 years, 3 years, whatever, and then you have one rough year, and what it can do as far as to your tomorrows. And so that's why we spend as much time as we do on this. So in this example here, we're looking at two different families. On the left, we've got a family that say that they have $100,000 that they put in, And on the right, they put in $100,000. Now, I'll be doggone, 25 years later, those individuals have the same amount of money. And that's the visual on the right there. And what we're doing here, and this is really key to understanding as far as the next slide, because I don't want it yet. I want to stay on this slide here. It's showing the sequence of returns and the significance of it. The emphasis here is there's no cash flow. What we've done is we've just changed the interest rates. So if you look at the left one, you started out negative rates of return the first couple of years. And if you look at the party on the right, the Andersons on the right, that same negative returns are on the bottom for them. So we just flip-flop the returns, okay? So same exact numbers, it's just a different period of time. One had the negative years early, the other one had the negative years late. But they still ended up at the same spot, okay? Very important point. Now, what we're going to look at here momentarily, because this one that we're looking at now, there is no distributions that have taken place. They're not taking out anything. Now, it's 26 years later, and that 26 years later, the people say, you know what, we need some cash flow. So let's go to the next slide, Andy, please. And the next slide is showing cash flow coming out at 5% per year. So please start on the Andersons, if you would. And the Andersons, on the prior example, ended up with a whole bunch of money. I think it was $600,000 roughly. And in this example, they have $298,000 at the end. $298,000 at the end, taking out $5,000 per year. Okay? Hopefully everybody's with there. 5% per year, every year, and they still have $298,000. Okay, they had good years returns in the early years. Bad years, the returns primarily were at the end, okay? Now, if we go to the other example, which is the Bakers. And the Bakers, unfortunately, had those negative years, year one, year two, down 7, down 15, give or take. That doesn't sound that bad, does it? I mean, markets go up and markets go down. That's only 22%. But what did it do to their retirement? Well, their $100,000, taking out $5,000 a year, ended up being empty. The account is empty in year 20. That's not what they're planning on, I'm sure, right? Now, what is the difference between the two? It's the sequence of returns that nipped them. The sequence of returns, they had 2 rough years right out of the gate. This is 07, 08, 09, 2007, 2008, 2009. But that was much more severe as far as the drops. But just imagine for a moment, and hopefully nobody on the call was in this situation. Imagine if you retired in 07 and you invested your money in this diversified mix of investments that historically have done really, really well, but son of a gun, my timing was off. And now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, I'm broke. That's not what you signed up for. That's not what you visualized. But that's exactly what can happen. So what we tell people is that it's so crucial, those last couple of years of working, those first couple of years of retirement, you can't afford a punch in the nose, meaning you can't afford to see your account balances drop significantly. And I don't know how you define significantly, because there is no exact answer. But what we do know is that a 22% drop in the example we're using here, 7, 15, 22% drop, taking out 5% per year, you're cooked. You're cooked. You're working at Walmart, not because you want to, but because you have to. You're working at the Superwash, not because you want to talk to people, it's because you have to. And that's what we don't want for people. So that's sequence of return, and again, just so crucial as far as helping people make better decisions. The next slide, if you would. This is my slide that I assembled years ago. I've used it every presentation that I do, and this to me is the most important slide of all. Looks kind of stupid, I'm guessing, to most people. Can your portfolio handle the future? Now, inflation, I don't know what your take is on inflation, folks, but again, I think inflation is going to be all likelihood a non-issue for quite some time. there's some talk about hyperinflation again. Same yapping that took place back in '07, which we never saw it. And you're hearing similar yapping. When you have debt loads like we have, I don't think inflation is going to be an issue. But I'm just looking in the history book here. History book says close to 4% is normal. I put 2 to 4% in that example under inflation. I think most people probably agree that's probably about right. To me, I'd probably argue for closer to 1, but let's use 2 in this example. Taxes, 1 to 3%. So you're making some money. You're going to take your money out at retirement. Uncle Sam's going to take a little bit of it. So they're taking a percentage. So you made 5% and you're in a 20% bracket. There's 1%. Ooh, they yanked out of your pocket. That's Uncle Sam saying thank you very much. Eat. What the heck is that? Well, you want to go out and eat, don't you? You want to travel. You want to do things. You worked really hard to build up your pile. Now you want that pile to sustain you the rest of your life. So again, people say, well, how much can I take out per year? And again, depending on who you talk to, they say typically 3 to 4%. Well, 3 to 4% off your coal pile, whatever it is. I got $1 million, 3 to 4% I can take out, and I want to take out, I should say, to be able to spend and do whatever I want to do. So again, let's use the low end of that, the 3%. So we got inflation, let's say at 2. We got taxes, the tax man's going to take 1. We want to eat, we want to go buy a car occasionally and do this and do that. So we're going to use 3. So what's your point, David? Your point is that you need to make 6% on your money. Not it would be nice, not this would be a good idea. You need to make 6% on your money. And in today's world, I'm not sure that's doable. Again, let's go back to that 50-50 portfolio when 50% of your money is sitting in a bond or cash collecting pretty close to 0. So what are you saying, David? I should have it all in stocks? Oh boy, hell no. Excuse my language, but no, that's not what I'm advocating. What I am advocating is you got to have a diversified mix, and you got to do some things differently than what you've ever done before. But my point here is 6% is a must, and 6% in today's world is extremely difficult to do on a consistent basis. Next slide. Taxation and retirement plans. So just look at these slides and visualize my hands right now holding those seeds. So I've got those seeds in my hands. And my question to you is, would you rather pay taxes on those seeds in my hand or this massive harvest over here? Seeds or harvest? Guess what? Every client that I talk to, every person that I talk to and I go through this with, they point to the seeds. And what are the seeds? That's not a 401k plan, putting it in a deferred account, because that one you're paying on the harvest. If this account goes up, you're paying on the harvest, not on the seeds. So we're doing the exact opposite of what this is illustrating here. The exact opposite of what everybody tells me they want. No, I want to pay in the seeds. I don't want to pay in the harvest. Then why are you doing what you're doing? Because somebody told you a long time ago this is a good idea. And I'm saying most of those people that told you it was a good idea have no background to speak of as far as with money. And the bottom line is they're giving you really, really, really marginal, at best, marginal advice. Next one, and I'll be quick. I know the time is getting tight here. But I want to show you how to make better decisions with your money, how to manage the money that you work so hard to put together to make better decisions. This visual exactly what we do. So here's your bell curve in the middle, and on the right, everybody gets that. Those are the positive numbers. We dig that stuff. But on the left is the stuff we have to talk about. That's the reality stuff. I don't know if that's what we're in right now or not, but I do know the tech stocks are down, depending on which one, 10 to 20%. The big boys that have been carrying this market, carrying the market. When you have 40% of the stocks in the S&P 500 that are negative rates of return, and yet the market is up, it's telling you that we've got somewhat of a narrow advance that's taken place. That concerns us. You need to be prepared to play defense. Here's the defense. Diversification. Hey, David, I got stocks and bonds, and, I got all the above. I got a little of this, a little of that. Yep. And all that stuff. I've got a nice visual if anybody's interested, showing the correlations. Fancy way of saying that when stocks tumble, they all pretty much tumble together. Yeah, I got some small caps. I've got mid caps. I got large caps. I got international. I got emerging markets. Yeah. We get a big pullback like we did in 07, 08, 09. We get a big pullback like we did in February and March. They all moved in sync. Yeah, maybe they were different, 2%, 3%. Who cares? One you're down 30%, the other one you're down 35%. It just feels horrible across the board. It's just horrible. So what do I do? Well, diversification is an okay answer for the first 10%. Not great, but okay for the first 10%. Stocks and bonds, okay? Stocks and bonds, that will help you for the first 10%. After that, forget it. Basically, no value as far as after that. Almost no value after that. The next level we talk to people about is tactical moves. We got to make tactical moves. We've got to step aside. We got to do something. So define risk, tactical movements. That's what we do. We think that's what you should be doing to try to protect the capital you've worked hard to build. And then finally, hedging. Hedging. That's once you get beyond 20%. Now it's hedging. Hedging is a fancy way. I hear people say, well, what is that? I said, do you insure your house? You've got a hedge investment basically with the insurance company. When you pay your premium to the insurance company, basically what are you saying? I think the house is going to burn to the ground. And the insurance company takes the money and says, I don't think it'll burn to the ground. One right, one wrong. Okay? Hedging. It's a small premium that I'm paying to hedge my decision, my investment. To hedge, to try to protect, to shield it from total destruction. Next slide. What should I own? These are three really important questions, folks. What should I own? Stocks, bonds, what? What should I own? How should I own it? Should I own it in just after-tax money? Should I put it into an annuity? Should I put it into an IRA? Should I put it into my 401k? Should I put it into my Roth investment? Okay? And then where? Where? So we've got how should I own it? My wife, myself, joint, whatever. What should I own? Where should I put it? These are really crucial questions. As a general thumb, you want dividend-paying type stuff. As a general rule of thumb, I'm talking about like interest and what have you on bonds that aren't much anymore. But those as a general thumb are typically going to be better with a shell around the money. A shell being like a 401k or something like that. And then you take your growth type investments and have them outside with current tax rates as they are. So outstanding, look at it. These are things to do. Next slide. This is my favorite topic to talk to people about. If there was a legal way that we could show you how to redirect a lot of your tax dollars that you can't keep. You can't keep them. This tax dollar you can't keep. But you have a choice. And that choice is you could redirect a fair amount of that to a charity or charities you care about, or you can keep giving it to the IRS. Anybody interested? I've never had clients say no to that. There's beautiful legal ways to accomplish many of these things. And the end result is that wealthy people have been doing this for years. The average person on the street is unaware of it. And again, we're on a mission as far as to educate people as far as in this area. And then the final slide, a gentleman massaging his skull. I'm confused. Hopefully you're not confused. Hopefully you got some value. Hopefully you learned a few things. And hopefully this makes your tomorrows better from the standpoint of understanding the importance of all of these decisions and how they need to be coordinated together. So, Andy, with that, I'll wrap mine up.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I'm motivated. I'm pumped. It's hard to keep my attention, and you did that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.